Good morning and welcome to our final back to school series. This morning we're going to talk all about homework tips. I've got two experts here with me. I've got Andrea Segraves.
Okay.
And I've got Dr. Brenda Arteaga.
Yes.
And you guys are both with the Harris County Department of Education. Is that
Yes,
correct?
ma'am.
Awesome.
Yes, we are.
So many people heading back to school. Monday, everyone, as you were saying, everyone should be back to school. Kind of coming in with the summer brain drain. You know, you've had those 3 months off. You may have lost a little bit of what you've learned at the end of last year. Getting back into the swing of things.
Yes.
As you're getting those first assignments, what do students need to prepare for? What can parents do to kind of help their students get back into the swing of things?
So if they haven't done it already, I think that they need to establish routines. They to just get them into that groove of getting up early, going to school, coming home, whether it's a snack when they get home or they start homework right away, just to have some of those things kind of set so that they do establish those routines for them.
And then as far as routines go, do they change based on kind of grade level? So your elementary school child would probably be doing something a little bit different than your middle schooler or your high schooler.
So the real point, I believe, of homework is to establish those routines that make them more independent of you. So whenever they're younger, of course, you establish those routines so that when they're older, you kind of wean them off and they become independent, and then they can establish their own routines. And so it depends on the amount of homework they have, allotting time for homework. So there's a huge difference in between each one of the levels and their needs and the need to kind of stay on top of that.
And then kind of going to workload. Should high school students have hours on end of classwork after school?
No, they shouldn't. Sometimes they do. But I think research shows that there are far more effective strategies and tools to help students be successful rather than having hours and hours of homework. So if they are having hours and hours of homework, that may be a conversation that families need to have, certainly, and then reaching out to the educators. And chunking, I think, is a great strategy for figuring out time management, because again, as you do that gradual release of support for your child, teaching them how to chunk and prioritize so maybe switching off like a hard task and then do an easier one, take a brain break, and there's a lot of research and talk now about mindfulness, and so hours of homework is certainly not the most effective strategy to help make students smarter.
And that's kind of on the staff side too. So do teachers, do they kind of coordinate, like, okay, well, you know, I have a lot of homework on Tuesday, maybe, you know, you can postpone in your class to have them have more homework on Wednesday or something like that?
So
Our hope would be.
And some schools I know have a set schedule, mm-hmm. and so they do recognize that fact that sometimes it would be hours upon hours if it were multiple subjects. So they have assignments, and then others, they have homework all week long, but it's more of a minimal amount, and so they're cognizant of the time that they're giving because they realize that there are multiple subjects.
Do you feel like for younger kids who may have the same teacher all day, that's easier to plan out than maybe your high schoolers that may be kind of going through international baccalaureate, AP classes, mm-hmm. regular classes, whatever?
Definitely.
Mm-hmm.
But I believe that they probably talk to each other whenever they're planning and pre-planning, especially for some of those higher levels that you mentioned, so that they're not getting 6 hours of homework, especially for our kids that work.
And then what should you do if your child doesn't know how to do the work sent home for homework?
So my brother calls me, so sometimes it's phone a friend, phone a sister, and because it's complex sometimes, and it wasn't the way that maybe we were taught, and mm-hmm. so I would say reach out, on Facebook and Twitter and things like that. You can also get help, but if you just can't figure it out, a note to the teacher is always great. whenever I was a teacher, if my parents, I expected my students to be able to do the homework by themselves because it should be a review or an extension of the learning. And so if they were having issues with that, I wanted to know that. And so the parents would just write a note at the top, and then I would be able to do a reteach with them if they didn't get the concept.
I think that would be a tip that we would give to parents is if you're noticing that they don't know what they're doing. And so like Brenda touched on a bit, is math is specifically taught a little bit differently now. And I know personally, when even as young as 3rd grade, and I'm an educator and have been in that setting, and should know how to do the new kind of thinking behind math, that I thought that I knew what I was doing when I was sitting down, and because I did it anchored really in the way I learned, but kind of trying to do that, I think his teacher probably would have appreciated me not doing that, because I kind of undid a few of the things that she was doing. So I learned pretty quickly to really check in with her and make sure that I knew the way that she was teaching. And then she kind of just said, like, leave that part to me. If he doesn't understand it, let me know. And then she does that reteaching during the class so that it is review or repetition of what they already know. And that certainly should be what they're doing at home. It should be a reinforcement of what's been taught already at school. And so if we don't know as parents how to do that, and the student didn't learn it during the day, it's really a great thing to be in communication with the teacher and ask and clarify.
And then how hands-on should parents be? Should kids be able to do their homework without the help of a parent? Is parent help like frowned upon?
I don't think it's frowned upon at all. I think it's a great communication tool, and a lot of parents rely on what comes home each night to kind of check in and keep up with what's going on. I do think, like we mentioned earlier, just kind of that gradual release of support, but I don't think it's frowned upon. It's just, as homework is designed, it should be a review. So there are different things that come home. So if a student doesn't finish something during class, that may be one reason why they're bringing it home. That would be different than an assignment that is just a few problems to reinforce what they've learned. So kind of understanding what is being sent home and why, and then choosing your level of support. Do you want to add to that?
Yeah, so it reminds me, a lot of the schools that I worked in were high poverty. So in that you have parents that are working 2-3 jobs, so it's not always possible for there to be parental involvement. So it's good for those parents to just have a check-in there. But students should be able to do the homework or a project without the parents. And I think that as educators, we have to remember that when we're assigning those tasks, because there are all different levels of involvement and capacities. And so the work should be independent, but if the parent can help and does have that time to be able to put into the project with the child, I think it's just really important that it doesn't turn into parent homework instead of student homework.
I'm glad you touched on that, because I was going to ask, how hands-on should a parent be? I remember when I was in high school, my parents were very hands-off. It's homework, you do it. You need me to buy something for this project, we'll go buy it, but you're on your own. But I had friends whose parents were very hands-on, to the point where the parents were almost doing the stuff for them. So where's the fine line between, okay, you're helping, and okay, you're doing too much, like your kid's not going to learn this because you're doing all the work?
So there is a fine line, and I think that may be what you were touching on. When is it frowned upon? I think the older that the student is and the more independent they are, the less the parents should be helping. You're certainly right when it shouldn't look like a parent project. It shouldn't look like something that a parent did for their child at home, because there is there's productive struggle, and that's when we learn. And so when the student is learning how to do their own projects, even though it may not look the way the parent wants it to look, kind of letting go of that and knowing that they're students, they're children, and they need to kind of have that struggle to be able to learn and reinforce what the work was how it was designed from the educators. So
Yeah, a lot of parents don't want their kids to fail, but in a part of learning is failure, and I believe in failing forward. So you learn something even when you don't get it completely right. There's some learning in that. Unfortunately, sometimes it's tied to grading, and so we just have to be cognizant of that also, because we don't want them to be penalized because they didn't get the help, and it can amount to sometimes a large part of their grades. So
Definitely, no parent wants to see their child fail.
Yeah,
So what do you do if you see your child struggling and they're frustrated, they're growing frustrated with the homework and the work that they're having to do for class every day?
I personally would do a check-in with the teacher and find out, are they not paying attention in class? Are they not taking notes? So how can I help them in that way? Just with some strategies and even backing the teacher up when need be, and maybe just having those clear communication channels with the teacher.
Awesome. And then as far as homework anxiety goes, what are the signs and what do you do to combat that?
So I think the signs, knowing your child and being there and being aware of the time limits and watching for just signs of frustration. They may not be, you can see them just sitting there, or you can see you're not seeing them be productive. And knowing when it's too much. Tears are often a good sign. I've had that at my house, and it may not be worth this, like this tonight after we've worked on this for a certain amount of time, knowing when to kind of just say, like, this is not as important as getting to bed on time, or just knowing as a parent to watch for, is this a good use of our time? Are they being successful? Because most of the time on homework, they should, like we've said, be able to do that. And if they're not watching it, and if you've been doing it for a long time at home, saying enough and then reaching out to the teacher.
And then in general, there are two groupings of kids. So some that procrastinate.
That was me.
And so you just put it off. Mm-hmm. And then others that just want to get it done right away. They rush through it, and then there are all kinds of errors. And so you have to really know your child, look for those things, and talk to them about either slowing down or going ahead and getting started. And then you have to think about the space that you have for them. Like, is there a particular homework space? Mm-hmm. Whatever it may be, and then do they have everything that they need in that space? So if they're a procrastinator, they may need to have things around them, like an iPad if they're going to do research, pens, pencil, any materials that they would need, so they wouldn't have to make an excuse to say, oh, and I need to go get the tape for this. Oh, and now I need to go get the scissors, because really they're just procrastinating. So I think it's watching them, seeing what they're doing, and if they're not getting started on it, I think that those can be signs of the anxiety that you're asking about.
And then I want to circle back to something you said. You were talking about getting to bed on time. How does sleep factor into this? 8 hours, 10 hours. I saw a recent study that was saying teenagers needed between 8 and 10 hours of sleep. I know I don't get that now, and I don't think I got that in high school either.
Right. Well, there are lots of studies that show directly the connection between the lack of sleep and your ability to think clearly and have productive work time. So I think it is directly connected. So that I think that's when you decide as a parent, when you've been working at homework for a certain amount of time, to say, we're going to cut this off now so that we can. And I think all of the tips and things that you read, I think when you are looking at their space, knowing that there's a certain time in the evening when technology should be off so that your brain can then rest before you lay down to go to bed. So I think it's a really powerful factor that needs to be more prevalent in when parents are watching that, because I think often they think they need to get this project done, so we're going to stay up till midnight because it's due tomorrow. But I think that's kind of teaching, knowing what kind of student you have and knowing that you've got to teach them time management, letting them have that productive struggle, but also knowing that there's a time limit when you need to say, like, you have to get the sleep because this project may not be worth it.
The other thing that people don't think about is water. So hydrating is really important for the brain, for the brain activity. I think that 75 or 80% of our brain is made up of water. And so when it doesn't have sufficient water, it doesn't work as well. And so those two things hand in hand, if we can make sure. So I had a conversation with a parent recently about getting cell phones. He said, my son doesn't have a cell phone and he's in 7th grade. And I said, wow, that's late now. And he said, yeah. He said, I'm just worried because they get on the phone at night after they go to bed. And I said, oh no, you have to take it. You have to take that cell phone. So I know I'm not a fan of any middle schoolers right now, but it's important that at least an hour before they're going to go to sleep, for them not to have that technology, the television not to be on when they go to sleep, and the room as dark as possible, because that's when you go into that really deep sleep, when your brain can really do the rest that she's talking about so that you're prepped for the next day.
And then kind of looking forward, so a lot of high schoolers preparing for college, and college isn't these days about getting in just based off of grades. You know, you have to be well-rounded, you have to have extracurricular activities. So what would you say to the student athlete that may be in advanced club? I know for me, I did international baccalaureate, I played club volleyball, I played normal volleyball, I was a track athlete, so like my day was always packed, and I feel like that kind of factored into why I didn't get any sleep. But what would you say to those parents about kind of getting back into the swing of things, of homework, and figuring out that routine that's going to work with that child that's just extremely busy?
I think it's a real struggle. I mean, I talk to parents every day where a student maybe begins with track at 5:30 or 6 in the morning, and then if you're doing band also in the afternoon, you're there till 6. So then you only have this short window of time, and then the cycle continues each day, because if you're tired from staying up to do homework, and then you're getting up early to go do all of it. I think it's just a balance, and knowing which of those is most important to the student, because absolutely a balance is, and a well-rounded student is what colleges are looking for, right? And they want to see that they're participating, and you want students to be a part of something bigger than themselves. So there's some real power in those extracurricular activities, more so than maybe hours of homework. So looking at balancing that, what would you tell athletes?
I think you have to monitor, are their grades being affected? So if they're not, then great, they're handling it well, because then they'll go into the workforce, and it's not always 8 to 5 anymore, or 8 to 4, or anything.
3:30 to 11:30.
Yes. I
AM.
definitely scratched 5 a.m. newscaster off my list of things to do in life, and so you probably didn't envision that in high school, and getting up at 3 a.m. or being here at 3 a.m. And so I think that it does prepare them. We just kind of have to monitor, is there a change in grades? Is there a change in attitude? Are they falling asleep at the dinner table? Things like that, just be aware as a parent.
And that's how you would gauge how much is too much, how many extracurricular activities is too many.
And then start to have those conversations with them about that. Because it could be something like, not only are they doing all those things, but they're staying up on technology, for 3 or 4 hours at night, and they're really only getting a few hours sleep.
And then I want to circle back to something we talked about a little earlier, just the fact that, especially with math, they're teaching it differently than, when you guys were in school, when I was in school. So how do parents combat that? Like, should they reach out to the teacher so they can learn the new way that they're learning, or should they kind of rely on the teacher to teach, or should they rely on a tutor, or what should they do?
So the first thing that comes up to my mind is Khan Academy, and it's great little short videos. They show you the new math, the new way of doing things, helps a student like with a really short tutorial. And my daughter for the longest time was like, oh mom. And so as a college student, she went on, she was like, this is the best thing ever. And so I think it's just finding what works for them. And so it could be a tutor because they need that face-to-face, or it could be something electronic. It could be a friend, you know, and encouraging them to ask a friend, do you know somebody in your class that's doing well that you could talk to? And so I think that that's a great lean in to depend on them.
It's also powerful to remain positive as parents, because sometimes when we don't understand it, we can kind of get in that thinking of, well, it worked the way I learned it, so why don't they just do it? And because sometimes the way we learned it was more of a memorized algorithm, and that seems easier, and you almost want to give that kind of shortcut to the child. But really understanding that the way that they are teaching it now is certainly anchored in more thinking. And so for us as parents, it seems like it's taking longer. It seems like we could teach them the way we learned. But I do think stopping and trusting that educators and years of research is why we've arrived here, and kind of supporting that. And so just that attitude of the parent towards it, because I think it could be easy to say, well, I know your teacher teaches it this way, but let me show you this quicker, easier, faster way. But certainly the focus now is on giving students different strategies, many different ways to solve a math problem, and then they are able to learn how they learn best, and then they choose that strategy. So really for parents, trusting that this new way is not always a bad thing, even though we may not understand it.
Perfect. And then usually during these, we take questions from viewers at home. Jaime, do you have any questions over there?
We do have some questions. A lot of complaints about the amount of work that's being sent home for students. One of the I think the keys I thought for me when I was in school was time management. Instead of leaving all your homework to be done when you got home, of trying to find pockets of time over the course of the day to tackle some of the assignments. I mean, what recommendations do you have in terms of what strategies tend to work with like time management and managing a workload?
So my son just started middle school. We've survived. This is our 5th day of middle school. So he's a new 6th grader who is learning how to manage 7 different classes. So just talking with him, listening to him and how he reasoned through his day was interesting. So I stopped to listen, and I had to hold back from correcting what I think he should do in terms of when he's going to his locker, when he's taking this, but keeping up with all of those materials, and then asking him. So even though you were in math class and you had free time, and even though you didn't have any math homework right then or work to be done, instead of kind of just taking a break for that free time that teacher gave, utilizing that extra time to get his assignment from another class done. So really kind of teaching, a lot of times we expect children to just know how to time manage. And so really teaching and talking through, okay, what are some pockets of time, just like that? What are the times during the day that you could have taken this and finished it so that it could reduce the hour that we had last night of trying to remember which teacher told you which, and then I'm in the middle of teaching him how to actually use the planner that we bought because he hadn't yet opened it and couldn't remember which teacher gave him which assignment. So really listening and walking through that with your child, I think is important to remember that they just don't do that automatically. And then the amount, I don't know, you want to add anything?
No, I was just going to agree with the planner, just looking at that so that they know how much time that they have, so that they could find those pockets of time that you're suggesting, because sometimes they won't have any homework, and then sometimes it'll seem like it's all night long homework. And so managing that and then using like the 20 minutes you have, because you can finish one assignment and knock it out. And so I think that probably is like best case scenario.
Perfect. Got another one for us?
Sure. Actually, one question that I had was, when I was younger, I used to always try to tackle the assignments that were easiest first and leave the most challenging ones towards the end. But then I found myself being too tired to be able to focus and really do the problem solving necessary to handle those tougher assignments. What's the best strategy in terms of trying to tackle those assignments that maybe those subjects that don't come as easy to us?
So I just had a conversation with somebody yesterday about that and about procrastinating. And so my advice to them was just go ahead and get started with that one, because it's kind of the anxiety that builds up all of that time that you're procrastinating, and I think that you make it worse than it really is. And then you can always start something, stop, and then come back to it. And I think what's kind of maybe what we program ourselves to think is that we need to start and finish it, and get it done, and just do it. And so there's nothing wrong with breaking it up, because then you can actually, if you're a processor and that's the way that your mind works, you have time to think about, okay, did that little section, oh wait, that probably was not right. So then you can go back, and I think that it makes the flow better, and then those big things that seemed like they were going to be hard and difficult actually end up in smaller tasks. Like, it's the small win theory.
Awesome. All right. Well, if you were to give parents at home watching this just general tips, homework tips, as their kids head back to school, what would the top 3 be?
I think the space, finding that space, knowing, because I have a social relator at home, and so knowing the places and the patterns of traffic in our home, knowing where he's going to have those most distractions, knowing what he needs there. So not only just materials, but things that are going to help him learn how to chunk his own assignments or chunk his own his time, so that he's aware of his own metacognition. So he's thinking about his thinking. So was I really doing my homework, or did I need a break right then to go get up and walk around, get my blood and oxygen going because I needed a break? So I think that atmosphere and that environment where you're kind of teaching them to know about themselves is really important. That'd be one of the environment and the space would be one of my top tips.
So mine would be communication. So communication with your child, communication with the school. When that's open, then you can really make good, sound decisions and know what's going on. And then I think maybe the other one would be that scheduling, and teaching them how to schedule and organize their materials, the time, and to really like start that pattern of knowing, like, it takes me 30 minutes to get this done, and so looking at that so they're not struggling in the end, or you're not waking them up at 4:30 to finish the homework they didn't finish the night before.
Perfect. Well, thank you guys so much. Those tips were so helpful. I hope they helped you guys at home. Hope everyone has a great morning, and happy back to school.
Yes.